In the vast expanse of the galaxy's outer rim where ancient stars cast their dying light across uncharted worlds, humanity had finally earned back the privilege to study what they had once destroyed. For centuries, biological research had been strictly regulated, a bitter reminder of the uncontrolled biological era that had nearly torn civilization apart. Now, under the watchful eye of the United Council of Colonies, selected scientists ventured into the unknown. Once more, their every discovery scrutinized, their every sample cataloged. Dr. Mira Kalin stood at the edge of her research station, gazing out at the bioluminescent forest that stretched endlessly before her. This planet, designated as XR47 in the colonial records, harbored an ecosystem unlike anything humanity had encountered. The trees pulsed with soft, ethereal light that shifted through spectrums visible and invisible to human eyes. Somewhere in those glowing depths lived the Velkar, a legendary apex predator spoken of in whispers among xenobiologists, described in fragmentary reports as part myth, part nightmare. The official records painted the Velkar as a killing machine, a predator so perfect that entire research teams had vanished attempting to study them. But Mira had spent years analyzing the inconsistencies in those reports, the gaps that suggested something more complex than simple predation. She had come here with official approval to study the planet's ecosystem, but her true mission was far more dangerous: to find the truth about the Velkar. What she didn't know was that the United Council had already decided what that truth should be. Far above the planet's atmosphere, in the sterile corridors of a council dreadnought, a different kind of predator prepared for deployment. Sable had no memory of birth, only purpose. Engineered from the genetic template of a dozen apex predators and enhanced with synthetic biology beyond current ethical standards, Sable was what humanity had promised never to create again: a living weapon. The mission parameters were simple: eliminate Dr. Kalin before her research could uncover classified information about the Velkar project. The Council's files contained truths that could destabilize the fragile peace between human colonies and the dozens of sentient species they had encountered. The Velkar wasn't just a predator, it was proof of something the Council had spent decades covering up. Sable's pod descended through the atmosphere like a falling star, its bio-organic hull shifting and adapting to atmospheric pressure with disturbing ease. As the planet's surface rushed up to meet him, Sable's enhanced senses cataloged everything: the chemical composition of the air, the electromagnetic signatures of the bioluminescent flora, the thermal patterns of local wildlife, and somewhere among all that data, the warm signature of his target. Mira was 3 days into her survey of the northern quadrant when she first noticed the signs. The scratches on the trees were too regular, too purposeful to be random. They formed patterns, not territorial markings, but something more sophisticated. As she documented the marks with her scanner, a thrill of excitement ran through her. These weren't the savage gouges of a mindless predator. They showed intelligence, perhaps even a form of communication. She didn't notice the predator watching her from the shadows, its enhanced metabolism slowing its heartbeat to an almost undetectable whisper. Sable had been tracking her for 6 hours, learning her patterns, identifying vulnerabilities. The kill would be simple: a precise strike to the cervical vertebrae, death in milliseconds, the body positioned to suggest an encounter with local wildlife. But as he watched her work, something unexpected happened. Dr. Kalin spoke to the forest, her voice soft and filled with wonder. "I see you," she whispered to the trees. "You're not monsters, are you? You're artists." Sable's enhanced hearing caught every word, every nuance of emotion. His orders were clear, his purpose undeniable, yet something about her tone gave him pause. This wasn't fear or scientific detachment, this was respect, even affection, for creatures that existed only in theoretical reports. The moment for a clean kill passed. Sable told himself he was simply gathering more intelligence, but the truth was more disturbing. He was curious. Over the following days, Mira pushed deeper into Velkar territory, following the patterns in the trees like breadcrumbs in an ancient tale. Her excitement grew with each discovery. The markings formed complex geometries, mathematical sequences that suggested not just intelligence, but a sophisticated understanding of spatial relationships. She began to suspect that the violent encounters in the historical records might have been misunderstandings, failures of communications rather than predatory attacks. Sable followed at a distance, his mission parameters growing more urgent with each passing hour. The council expected regular reports, confirmations that the target had been eliminated. But what he observed challenged everything in his programming. Dr. Kalin showed no fear of the Velkar, even when she found fresh signs that one had been in her camp while she slept. Instead, she left offering samples of her own food, small technological devices that might serve as communication aids. The contradiction between his orders and his observations created something Sable had never experienced: doubt. The crisis came on the 7th day. Mira, following a particularly complex trail of markings, nearly stumbled into a bioluminescent sinkhole hidden beneath a canopy of false vegetation. The fall would have been fatal, her body lost in the acidic pools below. But before she could plummet to her death, strong arms caught her, pulling her back from the edge with inhuman speed and strength. She found herself staring into eyes that were almost human, but not quite. The bone structure was too perfect, the movements too precise. Her rescuer wore no uniform, carried no identification, but the scars that crisscrossed his visible skin told a story of violence that chilled her scientific curiosity. "Thank you." She managed, her voice barely a whisper. Sable released her and stepped back, his mind reeling. He had moved on instinct, his enhanced reflexes overriding his mission protocols. For a moment, looking into her eyes, eyes that held no suspicion, no fear, only gratitude, he forgot what he was. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice carefully modulated to hide its synthetic undertones. "Neither should you," Mira replied, dusting herself off with the calm pragmatism of someone who had faced danger before. "But here we are. I'm Dr. Mira Kalin, xenobiologist. And you are." For the first time in his existence, Sable hesitated. "I'm a hunter." The half-truth felt strange on his tongue. Mira studied him with the intense curiosity of a scientist encountering a new species, and Sable realized with growing alarm that she might be more dangerous to him than he was to her. Their conversation that night around her camp's modest fire revealed more than Sable had intended. Mira spoke passionately about her research, her theories about Velkar intelligence, her frustration with the Council's rigid categorization of extraterrestrial life. She treated him not as a threat, but as a fellow exile in the wilderness, someone who might understand the loneliness of pursuing truth in a universe that preferred comfortable lies. Sable found himself sharing carefully edited versions of his own experiences, his training in tracking and survival, his knowledge of predatory behavior, his sense of being created for purposes that felt increasingly hollow. He didn't mention that his training involved 17 different methods, simultaneity of killing sentient beings, or that every word she spoke was being recorded by bioneural implants for later transmission to his handlers. When Mira fell asleep by the dying fire, Sable stared at her peaceful face and felt something he couldn't identify. In his programming, she was designated as target Kalin Mira. Threat level minimal. Termination priority absolute. But sitting there in the glow of bioluminescent trees, she seemed like something else entirely, someone worth protecting. The next morning brought unwelcome visitors. A council patrol ship broke atmosphere, its military transponders broadcasting official authorization codes. Sable's enhanced hearing picked up the communications before Mira's equipment could decode them. Elimination protocols were being updated, environmental cleanup crews were being dispatched, and Dr. Kalin's research permit had been posthumously revoked. "We need to move," he told her urgently. "Why?" "That's a council ship. They're probably here to check on my progress." Sable met her eyes, and in that moment made the decision that would redefine his existence. "They're here to kill you." The words hung between them like a bridge burning. Mira's scientific mind raced through the implications while her survival instincts took over. How do you know? Because, Sable said, his voice heavy with something approaching shame, they sent me to do it first. The revelation should have terrified her. Instead, Mira felt a strange sense of completion, as though a puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. But you didn't. No, I didn't. Why? Sable struggled to find words for emotions his creators had never intended him to feel. You see them as more than weapons, the Velkar. You look at the universe and see potential instead of threats. I was created to eliminate threats, but you made me see that maybe I was wrong about what threatens us. The patrol ship's search pattern was closing in on their position. Mira moved with surprising efficiency, gathering her most critical research data and destroying anything that couldn't be carried. There's a biological preserve deeper in the forest, she said. The Velkar territory. Council satellites can't penetrate the bioelectromagnetic interference. And the Velkar. We'll have to trust that they're as intelligent as I think they are. They ran through the forest as dawn broke over the canopy, Sable's enhanced physiology allowing him to carry equipment that would have slowed Mira's escape. Behind them, the whine of military gravcraft grew louder as the hunting party found their abandoned camp. Dr. Kalin. A voice echoed through the trees, amplified by military speakers. This is Commander Torres. We're here to extract you safely. Please respond. Mira kept running. They're using my research codes, she called to Sable. They've been monitoring everything. They always were, Sable replied grimly. The Council doesn't send researchers to study. They send them to confirm what they've already decided. They reached the edge of the preserve as the first hunter-killers burst through the canopy behind them. These weren't standard Council troops. They were specialists equipped with technology designed specifically for biomechanical targets. Sable recognized the weapons, the tactics, the cold efficiency in their movements. He recognized it because he had been trained by the same program. The firefight was brief and brutal. Sable's combat protocols engaged fully for the first time since his awakening, turning him into the perfect predator he had been designed to be. But now he fought to protect rather than eliminate, and the distinction felt like salvation. When the last attacker fell, Sable stood among the bodies with something approaching horror. He had killed his own kind. Artificial beings like himself, created for the same purpose, denied the same choice he had been given. Sable! Mira's voice was soft, concerned. She stood at the edge of the preserve, her hand extended toward him. Come away from them. He looked at her outstretched hand, then at the dead hunters. This is what I am. This is what I was made for. No, she said firmly. This is what you were told you were made for. What you choose to do now is what you actually are. Beyond them, the forest glowed with patterns of light that seemed to pulse in response to their presence. The Velkar were watching, waiting, making calculations of their own. Sable took her hand and together they crossed into the preserve. The Velkar territory was unlike anything in Mira's research, more beautiful and alien than even her wildest theories had suggested. The trees here didn't just glow, they sang their bioluminescence, creating harmonics that resonated through the ground itself. The very air seemed alive with purpose. They found shelter in a grove, where the canopy formed a natural cathedral, its living walls providing protection from orbital surveillance. Mira set up her remaining equipment, while Sable, wounded from the firefight, allowed her to treat his injuries. Your blood, she observed clinically, it's not entirely human. Nothing about me is entirely human, but it's not entirely artificial either. She cleaned a gash on his shoulder with professional detachment. Your healing rate is accelerated, but the tissue regeneration follows organic patterns. Whoever made you, they didn't just build a weapon, they created a new form of life. I'm a sin against nature. The Council will say so when they classify what I am. Mira paused in her work, considering his words. The Council classifies everything according to whether it serves their purposes. They call the Velkar monsters because acknowledging their intelligence would challenge human supremacy in this sector. They call you a weapon because admitting you can choose would mean accepting responsibility for all the choices you make on their behalf. And what do you call me? She met his eyes, those almost human eyes that held depths no programmed intelligence should possess. I call you Sable, and I think you're magnificent. The word hit him like a blow. No one had ever called him magnificent. Efficient, yes. Deadly, certainly. But magnificent suggested something beyond mere function. It suggested worth. I came here to kill you, he said, needing her to understand the full scope of what he was. I watched you for days, planned exactly how to do it. You would have died never knowing why. But you changed your mind. I changed my entire existence. That night, they were visited by the Velkar. Mira woke to find figures standing at the edge of their camp, tall, graceful beings with features that seemed to shift and flow in the pulsing light of the forest. They moved without sound, their forms somehow familiar, yet utterly alien. Sable woke instantly, his combat reflexes engaging before his consciousness caught up. But Mira placed a hand on his arm, stopping him from reaching for his weapons. They're not here to hurt us, she whispered. The Velkar regarded them both with eyes that held ancient intelligence. One of them, larger than the others, with markings that seemed to indicate status, approached Mira slowly. When it spoke, its voice was like wind through crystal caves. You are the one who reads our words in the trees, it said in accented but clear standard. Mira could barely contain her excitement. You can speak our language. We have watched your kind for generations. We learned your words as you learned to fear our shapes. The Velkar turned to Sable, its eyes narrowing. But you are something new, created to destroy what your makers do not understand. I'm a weapon that chose not to fire, Sable replied carefully. Choice. The Velkar mused. Your makers give this gift to those they create, thinking they can program the directions it will take. They are often disappointed. The Velkar leader gestured, and others of its kind emerged from the shadows, carrying objects that gleamed in the bioluminescent light. They were technologies of astounding complexity, fusion of organic and artificial elements that made human engineering look primitive. Your council thinks we are animals because we do not build cities as you do, but we build with life itself. We shape the forest guide, its growth create tools that live and breathe and think. The being's expression was unreadable, but Mira sensed ancient sadness. Your people fear us because we prove that intelligence need not follow human patterns. Is that why they sent him? Mira gestured to Sable. Not just to kill me, but to confirm their worst fears about you. Partly, but mostly because you were beginning to understand truths that would upset the careful lies they tell themselves. The Velkar showed them recordings, images captured by the forest itself, growing organisms that could store and replay experiences like living memory. They showed council ships arriving decades ago, not for research but for something far darker. They showed experiments, attempts to weaponize Velkar biology failures that resulted in the creation of creatures like Sable. You're not just a weapon, Mira realized, staring at the evidence. You're a prototype. They were trying to create artificial Velkar. Sable felt pieces of his identity shifting, reassembling into new patterns. They failed. Did they? The Velkar leader asked. You have our speed, our strength, our adaptability. But you also have something we do not. You were born into a species capable of great cruelty, and you chose kindness instead. Perhaps that makes you superior to both our kinds. The conversation continued through the night, a three-way exchange that rewrote Mira's understanding of galactic politics and Sable's understanding of his own nature. The Velkar had been watching humanity's expansion into space, had seen the pattern of fear and suppression that followed wherever humans encountered intelligence they couldn't control. The council will come again, the Velkar warned. They will bring more hunters, heavier weapons. They will not stop until we are contained or eliminated. Not if they can't find us, Mira said quietly. Not if the truth reaches other colonies before they can suppress it. You want to expose them? I want to save both our species from a war that only serves the Council's control. She spent the following days encoding her research into quantum data bursts messages that could be transmitted across the galaxy at the speed of thought. The information was too important to trust to normal communication channels she would need to get it to independent news networks. University allies who weren't under Council oversight colonies that still valued truth over political convenience. Sable learned during this time that the Velkar had been watching him since his arrival had known his purpose before he had revealed it to Mira. They had seen his struggle, his choice, and had decided to trust these unexpected guests, partly because of his transformation. You show that change is possible, the Velkar leader told him, even for those created to be unchanging. When the time came to transmit Mira's data, the Velkar provided assistance that human technology couldn't match. Their bio-organic systems could channel communications through the forest's neural network, bouncing signals between planets through living conduits that Council monitoring couldn't detect. As the transmission began painting the night sky with subtle emissions that would carry truth across star systems, Sable and Mira stood together watching the forest pulse with purpose. "They'll never stop hunting us," Sable observed. "Probably not. And we'll never be able to return to human space. Not as long as the current Council remains in power. Any regrets?" Mira smiled an expression that contained multitudes, lost hope, determination, and something that might have been love. "I became a scientist to discover new forms of life. I never imagined I'd find one sleeping in my own camp." "Sleeping? You dream, Sable. I've seen you. Artificial intelligences don't dream, only living beings do." That night, as alien constellations wheeled overhead and the forest sang its ancient songs, Mira lay down beside the being that had been sent to kill her. Sable, programmed for eternal vigilance, allowed himself to enter the state humans called sleep. The weeks that followed brought news from across the galaxy. Mira's transmissions had reached their targets. Independent news agencies, research institutions, colonial governments that had grown tired of Council overreach. The revelations sparked debates, investigations, demands for transparency that the Council couldn't simply suppress. But they tried. More ships came to the planet, bringing with them technologies designed to scour every inch of the surface. The Velkar retreated deeper into their forest sanctuary, taking Mira and Sable with them. They traveled through bioluminescent tunnels that ran beneath the continents, rode in vessels grown rather than built, witnessed wonders that challenged every assumption about the relationship between technology and nature. Sable adapted to this new life with the flexibility that was perhaps his greatest gift. He learned Velkar philosophy, studied their history, trained with weapons that were cultivated rather than manufactured. The other Velkar accepted him with cautious respect. He was proof that the division between natural and artificial life was not as absolute as either species had believed. Mira thrived in the underground city. They discovered a vast network of living spaces carved from the roots of titanic trees. She worked alongside Velkar biologists, trading knowledge between species, developing new theories about the nature of intelligence itself. But at night, she always returned to Sable. "We've received word from the outer colonies," she told him one evening, as they sat in what the Velkar called a memory garden, a place where the walls themselves could replay the history of those who had lived there. "3 systems have declared independence from the Council. They're citing our evidence of illegal bioweapon experimentation." "A civil war is coming," Sable said grimly. "Maybe. Or maybe the Council will finally realize that ruling through fear and suppression is no longer sustainable. You have more faith in human nature than I do. I have faith in change. After all, you changed." Sable considered this. The Velkar believe that all sapient life has the potential for growth, even artificial life. They say consciousness is like water. It flows into whatever container holds it, but its essential nature remains the same. And what is that nature? The desire to connect, to understand, to be understood. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the walls replay scenes from Velkar history. Great gatherings where decisions were made through consensus, times of crisis overcome through cooperation. Moments of joy shared across generational lines. Sable, Mira said, eventually, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had completed your mission, if you had killed me that first week?" Often. And you would have died believing that intelligence could transcend the urge to destroy. I would have completed my programming and moved on to the next target. The Velkar would have remained mysterious and threatening in the Council records, and the galaxy would have been a smaller, sadder place. But that's not what happened. No, something unprecedented happened instead. "What's that?" Sable turned to her, and in his almost human eyes, she saw something that defied every assumption about artificial intelligence, about the nature of consciousness itself. A weapon learned to love. Months passed. The outside galaxy continued its political upheavals, while Mira and Sable built a new life in the depths of the Velkar sanctuary. The revolutionary fever had spread. More than a dozen systems had now broken from the Council, forming a loose confederation based on principles of scientific freedom and interspecies cooperation. Sometimes delegations arrived on the planet, representatives from the breakaway colonies who wanted to meet the woman whose research had sparked their revolution. But they found only empty research stations and abandoned camps. Dr. Kaylin and her mysterious companion had vanished into the forest, leaving behind only legends and questions. In the deep places of the world where ancient trees grew into living cities and technology bloomed like flowers, Mira continued her work. She studied Velkar society, documented their history, learned their arts. Her research had grown beyond mere biological observation. She was now chronicling the birth of a new kind of civilization, one that might serve as a model for the galaxy's future. Sable served as her partner in this work, his unique perspective bridging the gap between created intelligence and evolved consciousness. The Velkar had given him a gift, a bioorganic implant that enhanced his natural abilities while connecting him to the forest's collective intelligence. He was still himself, still individual, but now he could touch the edges of something vast and collaborative. Together they wrote new theories about the nature of consciousness, the possibilities of cooperation between species, the potential for artificial intelligence to transcend its programming. Their work was transmitted secretly to philosophers and scientists across the galaxy, spreading ideas that might one day reshape civilization itself. But it was in the quiet moments that their true revolution took place. In the evening, when Mira would fall asleep reading research notes, Sable would carefully extract the data tablet from her hands and darken the bioluminescent panels that served as lights. In the morning, when nightmares of his violent past would wake him, Mira would be there with gentle words and gentle touch, reminding him that he was more than the sum of his original programming. The forest around them pulsed with the rhythms of countless lives, Velkar moving through their daily routines, biotechnology growing and adapting the slow wisdom of truly ancient trees. In this place, the distinction between natural and artificial had become meaningless. Everything was simply alive. Years passed. The galactic civil war ended not with victory for either side, but with the dissolution of the old council and the formation of a new governmental structure based on species cooperation rather than human hegemony. The Velkar emerged from hiding to take their place as a founding member of this new alliance, bringing with them technologies and philosophies that enriched all participating civilizations. Dr. Kaylin became a legend, the human who had risked everything to reveal the truth about interspecies intelligence, who had disappeared into the depths of an alien world and emerged changed. Those who met her in later years found a woman of quiet wisdom and startling insights, accompanied always by a companion whose origins remained mysterious, but whose loyalty was unquestioned. Sable evolved beyond his original parameters in ways his creators had never imagined. The bioorganic modifications gifted by the Velkar had awakened dormant potentials in his synthetic biology, allowing him to continue growing and changing in ways that purely artificial intelligence rarely achieved. He became something new, a bridge between organic and synthetic life, proof that consciousness could emerge from any substrate given the right conditions. The planet where they had first met became a pilgrimage site of sorts, a place where beings from across the galaxy could come to study cooperation between species. The research station was rebuilt, expanded, turned into a university that specialized in interspecies communication and biosynthetic integration. But in the deep forest, in the living cities of the Velkar, the routine remained much the same. Mira would work among the memory trees, documenting history and wisdom. Sable would tend to the children, both Velkar younglings and synthetic beings, created in the new era of cooperation rather than control. And at night, exhausted by the day's work, but fulfilled in ways neither had imagined possible, they would sleep beside each other in the glowing embrace of the forest. The creature sent to kill her had become her greatest protector, while the scientist sent to study monsters had discovered instead a new form of beauty. In the language of the Velkar, there was a phrase that had no human equivalent: the peace of understanding. It referred to the moment when apparent opposites revealed themselves to be complementary aspects of a greater whole. In the quiet moments before some sleep, as bioluminescent patterns played across the walls around them, Mira and Sable often contemplated this phrase. They had been created by forces that sought control through fear and separation, but they had chosen connection over isolation, understanding over ignorance, love over violence. In doing so, they had not only saved two civilizations from a devastating war, they had proven that the future belonged not to any single species, but to the vast and glorious collaboration possible when intelligence reached across the boundaries that divided life into artificial categories. The apex predator and the prey had become partners. The weapon and the target had become lovers. And in their peaceful sleep, cradled by a forest that sang with the voices of 1,000 species, they dreamed of a galaxy where such transformations were not miraculous exceptions, but simply the way things were meant to be. The peace of understanding. It glowed around them like bioluminescent light, warm and eternal and absolutely natural. And in the morning, they would wake to continue the work of building a universe worthy of that peace.